Before we begin, a brief note. My mother works for an office and all these things from the inside. This isn't just a story for the sake of use, it's a real experience that many will recognize. I'm doing this so you don't repeat other people's mistakes. All names, companies, and addresses are fixtures and have been changed. Let's get started.
The second Mason walked into that conference room, khakis cuffed like a TikTok pastor, jaw clenched like he'd just solved logistics with a TED Talk, I knew the piece was over. Not the weather's shifting kind of knowing. No, this was the kind of knowing you get when your gut goes cold, like a freight train slamming brakes on black ice. He didn't shake my hand, didn't ask what I did, just sat at the head of the table and said, "We're going to sunset all the old tech. Time for fresh blood." Sunset. That was the word he used, like the past 8 years of stability were just some romantic little afterglow to be admired and then erased. I kept my face still. No blinking, no twitching, just a nod and a mental note. Mason Greer, the CEO's son. Fresh out of B school with a C- in humility and a last name that opened more doors than a master key. That afternoon, I pulled the binder from my bottom drawer. It smelled like toner and quiet revenge. Atlas Root wasn't company property. It was mine. Built in year 2 under my own LLC while they were still figuring out how to spell compliance. Licensed annually. Renewed without fail. Nobody questioned it because it worked. No meetings, no breakdowns, no missed benchmarks, and because it ran silent, they assumed it was simple. Like mistaking a surgical laser for a flashlight. If you're enjoying this story, do us a small favor. Tap subscribe and like the video. 97% of listeners never hit that button, but it means the world to the team putting these stories together. Seriously, it takes 1 second and makes a huge difference. Back then, I was the kind of person folks forgot to thank at holiday parties. The one who remembered to update the cross-dock SLAs before the customs review. The one who tracked port strikes in Busan before they hit our ETAs. Hell, the one who fixed a cascading server bug on a Sunday during my niece's birthday without making a scene. I didn't want spotlights. I wanted precision. I wanted to know that when someone clicked dispatch, the system answered with certainty. But Mason didn't come from certainty. He came from slogans. Digital uplift, he called it. A bright new future with buzzwords and dashboards and some overpriced third-party platform out of Austin that looked slick but couldn't route a snowplow in a blizzard. He was shiny shoes and bravado, and to him, I was the old system. He started making rounds, unrolling diagrams on dry erase boards like a budget, Elon Musk. Had the tech team wrapped around his finger with free lattes and thought leader speeches, ignored the ops leads, didn't even glance at the regional compliance trackers I'd spent years refining. But the moment he announced the migration plan, I caught it. He thought Atlas Root was a file folder, a thing you drag and drop. He didn't understand that the system wasn't just code. It was law. Bound by license, reinforced by years of IP control and fail-safe triggers buried deep in its spine. He asked me, all cocky and cavalier, "Think you can port it over by Monday?" I said, "No." He blinked. "Excuse me?" I shrugged. "Can't port what you don't own." He laughed, called me dramatic, and said his dad's company owned everything in the building, including me. Real original. I didn't argue. I didn't correct him. I just turned back to my screen, finished updating a shipment header for a client out of Spokane, and then emailed myself a copy of the license terms. Not because I needed a reminder, but because I knew within a week he'd pull the trigger. And he did. Friday, 3:44 p.m., I got the HR ping. A calendar invite with no context. Room B214, 15 minutes. I took my time getting there. Stopped by the vending machine, grabbed a ginger ale, and sipped it slow. When I walked in, Mason was already smiling, like he was about to win a game he didn't know he was playing. He said, "It's your last day, champ. No hard feelings, right? Thought we'd send you off with some wings and cheer." I handed him a sealed envelope. He grinned. "What's this? A goodbye poem?" I didn't answer. He flung it to the guy sitting beside him. Some poor junior legal associate with stress acne and a clipboard. The moment he broke the seal and started reading, the mood changed. Fast. His eyes moved down the page, his lips tightened. He looked at Mason, then back at the paper. I finished the ginger ale, and I walked out. Past the HR reps, past the intern pretending not to eavesdrop, past the glass-walled fishbowl of a conference room where the CEO stood frozen. He saw me, saw the envelope, and his face. God, his face. Like someone had just handed him a live grenade he'd forgotten he pulled the pin on. I didn't say a word. Didn't need to, because that envelope wasn't just paper. It was the match, and he had no idea how dry the room already was. Mason strutted around like he'd just discovered electricity and thought we'd all been running on candlelight. Monday morning came, and with it a flurry of emails titled things like Project Phoenix and New Dawn Workflow Initiative, stuff that sounded like a TED Talk and smelled like panic in the making. He gathered the IT team for a stand-up, called it a war room, and started mapping out his genius vision with a neon marker and absolutely zero technical context. "We're scrapping the old model," he said, standing in front of my diagram like it was a relic. "New platforms in Austin. We'll run everything through their interface. Migration starts now." He looked at me, sharp and smug. "You'll port your code into their system by Monday. It'll be plug and play." I just stared at him. Port what, exactly? Your scheduler, Atlas, whatever. We'll dump it into their structure and tag on our branding. It's all company IP anyway. I tilted my head, like I hadn't heard him. "You sure about that?" He waved me off. "My dad's company owns this whole building. That includes you and whatever you've been tinkering with." See? Mason had that rich boy syndrome where confidence fills in the cracks where competence is supposed to be. He assumed everything that ran smoothly was his by proximity. Atlas Root had operated flawlessly for so long he forgot it was ever built, let alone licensed. What he didn't know is that it wasn't just a script file zipped onto a shared drive. It was an infrastructure layer, a living system tied to regional tariffs, compliance flags, SLA pressure points, and fallback redundancy logic. I didn't just write it. I built it like a damn fortress. And I licensed it through my LLC every single year. He hadn't even glanced at the paperwork before throwing down his little ultimatum. He thought code was just code. Data to be absorbed. He had no clue the thing he was so eager to lift was tethered tighter than a cargo lock during a wind advisory. I didn't argue, didn't stomp or shout. I nodded, like someone who'd seen the avalanche already forming behind him and figured there wasn't much point in yelling about it. That night, I opened my fireproof file box. The original incorporation records were still there, still crisp. Virex Freight Lines had agreed, years ago, that any code written under external consultancy would remain external property unless otherwise transferred in writing. That never happened. They renewed it blindly, assuming I'd always be there. I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, not even because I was angry, because I realized right then that Mason had already pushed the red button. He just hadn't heard the countdown yet. He gave a presentation later that week where he laid out the new system's launch timeline, called it ambitious but achievable. Everyone clapped. Not me. I was busy backing up my documents, quietly archiving logs, deactivating a few legacy endpoints that weren't needed anymore. They called me grumpy behind my back. Old school. One of the younger devs whispered that I was scared of change. Nah, I just knew what came next. They thought I'd resist, maybe even rage quit, give them a dramatic scene to point at later. But I didn't. I helped them draft migration outlines, smiled in meetings, let them think I was grateful for the graceful exit HR had promised. Mason had no clue that every box they ticked off, every line of my system they tried to mirror, was a trap door ready to swing. And when it did, I wouldn't have to lift a finger. The license would do it for me. Friday, 3:44 p.m., right on schedule because of course he'd want a dramatic exit to kick off the weekend. Mason came sauntering in like a man who thought he'd just fixed a sinking ship by slapping on some decals. Hair gelled, Rolex peeking just enough from his cuff to look intentional. 2 HR reps flanked him like backup dancers, and trailing behind was some poor legal associate with a binder full of misplaced confidence and a discount tie. Mason beamed at me, like we were buddies from a retirement home about to have one last cookout. "It's your last day, old man," he said, clapping me on the back like he hadn't just gutted the logistics backbone of the company 3 days ago. "Go ahead, order some fried chicken for the crew. We're sending you off in style." Fried chicken. The way he said it, you'd think he invented hospitality. Like a bucket of wings and a pity card could wrap up 8 years of showing up early, catching cascading shipment failures, and saving his father's reputation more times than I could count. I looked at him, really looked at him and thought, "You have no idea what's coming, do you?" I didn't make a speech, didn't scold. Just stood up, smoothed out my shirt, and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. I'd cleaned it out already, except for the envelope. White, sealed, no markings. I handed it to him with both hands. He laughed like I'd just handed him a coupon for a free latte. "What's this? A goodbye poem?" He held it up theatrically. I stayed silent. He turned and tossed it toward the legal associate like it was trash mail. "Make sure it's not a love letter," he snorted. The poor kid caught it, fumbled with the flap, and began reading. I walked out. No ceremony, no tears. Just the quiet hum of the HVAC and the sound of Mason talking about where to cater sides from. Mac and cheese or potato wedges? Becca, what do you think? I passed Becca, who gave me a little smile. Not the fake kind, more like she knew something too. The elevator was already on my floor. I stepped in, pressed the button, and watched the doors begin to close. That's when I saw him. The CEO, Richard Greer, Mason's father, standing outside a nearby conference room, shirt sleeves rolled, glasses low on his nose. He wasn't talking, just standing there, watching the legal associate read. Then his head snapped toward the kid, then to the envelope. His face changed, slack, color draining. Lips parted just slightly, like the oxygen had left the room, but his lungs hadn't gotten the memo yet. He looked at me, not in anger, in realization. The doors closed before I could see what he did next. But I had a pretty good idea, because what Mason tossed like a joke was not a love letter. It was a formal notification of license termination, effective immediately, signed, sealed, and backed by every clause they'd forgotten to read. The routing system was about to go dark, and no amount of chicken was going to fix it. Monday started with silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that tells you something's very, very wrong. No alerts, no status updates, no routing logs flowing into the dashboards like usual. Just blank spaces where thousands of shipment updates should have been. At 7:08 a.m., the first flag hit. License verification failed. Contact administrator. And then another. And another. By 7:15, 7 terminals were offline. Not just delayed, frozen. Atlas Route, the same system they dismissed as legacy junk, had finally spoken its first and only protest. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't crash. It didn't break the servers. It simply stopped responding. The back-end team thought it was a permissions issue. Support thought it was a missed update. Mason thought, God help us, that it was just some old cron job glitching out. They ran diagnostics, checked firewalls, tried soft resets and virtual rollbacks. Nothing worked. The routing module refused all calls, denied all credentials, and, just as it was designed to, detected the change in environment. New host. Unauthorized access attempt. No valid license key present. Shut it all down. The Austin team was looped in. Some guy with a headset and too much caffeine started tossing acronyms around like grenades. "We'll mirror the API to our fallback cluster," he said. "Maybe force a tunnel sync." They tried. The system blocked it. Rehosting? Denied. The smart wrapper didn't just protect the code, it watched where it lived. And if that IP signature changed, the whole thing would enter a defensive posture. Read-only mode, null routing, credential blockout. Meanwhile, out in the real world, freight was backing up. Distribution centers were calling in, asking where their reroutes were. One of the regional partners out of Memphis flagged a missed window with a 6-figure penalty attached. Another in Denver couldn't verify customs paperwork because Atlas Route handled the embedded tariff syncs. Inside the war room, Mason was pacing like a college kid who'd lost his laptop before finals. "It's a hiccup," he kept saying. "It's just a hiccup. We'll fix it." But the look on Legal's face said otherwise. I wasn't there, obviously, but word travels fast. Becca messaged me a screenshot. Black screen, red banner, white font, license invalid. Contact Vexar Holdings LLC. That was my LLC. The silence broke by mid-morning. Not inside the building, out there. Clients started calling. Big ones. Contracted ones. The kind that don't like hiccups. One called the delay a breach, another used the word recompense. By noon, 3 scheduled freight runs had missed their dispatch windows entirely. That alone was going to cost them more than my entire salary for the past 5 years. The panic hit like dominoes. Customer support. account management, billing, everyone scrambling to come up with an answer while Mason stood there trying to reboot something he didn't understand. There was a moment, somewhere around 1:45, when he reportedly asked, "Can't we just uninstall it and start over?" The room went quiet, because that's when legal finally pulled the contract and found the clause, the same one I'd folded into the original agreement back in 2015 when no one thought the old lady in compliance needed to be supervised. The one that said all replication, migration, or redeployment of the platform would require written, notarized consent from the licensor. They had none of that. They had fried chicken, a terminated license, and a freight network bleeding money by the hour. And still, Mason didn't get it. He was too busy blaming the Austin devs, calling it bad integration. He had no idea the code hadn't failed. It had simply obeyed. It did exactly what it was built to do: refuse to serve the people who broke the contract. The binder had been sitting in legal's filing room for years. Bottom shelf, third cabinet, probably used more often to prop up someone's desk lamp than for actual reference. But when the system refused to cooperate, when the Austin platform failed to override even the most basic routing script, someone finally decided to dust off the old records. Initial contractor agreements, 2015. They flipped through pages marked by coffee stains and highlighter scars until they found it. Tucked neatly in the middle, behind a paperclip and a note that said, "Renew annually," was Clause 17C. And it read like a bullet. All core logic remains sole property of Vexar Holdings LLC unless assigned through written mutual agreement. All external replication requires licensee's notarized consent. That was the line that changed everything. The line they never bothered to read because I never gave them a reason to worry. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't remind them. I just quietly renewed it each year, kept the fees stable, kept the SLA sheets clean, and gave them every reason to think the world would keep turning as long as they didn't poke the system too hard. But Mason didn't just poke it. He ripped the battery out, called it obsolete, and threw it in the trash while whistling about innovation. And in doing so, he severed the one thing he couldn't replicate: the license. I didn't need to disable anything. I didn't build some vengeful kill switch or plant a virus in the code. There was no gotcha moment with flashing red lights and a video recording of me laughing maniacally. That would have made him feel important. Instead, I built something simple, predictable, legal, because systems don't retaliate, they respond, and Atlas Root responded exactly how it was meant to. Without a valid license, it ceased functionality. Not dramatically, not destructively, just clinically, like a power grid shutting down one circuit at a time. No risk, no mess, no lawsuits, just absence. And that absence echoed louder than any tantrum ever could. I heard through Becca that Mason tried to blame IT. "They must have missed a patch," he said. He barked at legal to check the fine print. They did, painstakingly. And what they found was that the system had never once been sold, transferred, or internally reassigned. The company had simply paid the invoice each year and assumed it was theirs. Wrong. They were licensees, nothing more. Virex Freight Lines had been leasing a brain it never bothered to understand. And when they fired the person who held the keys, the brain politely went to sleep. There was no anger in any of this, no need for me to gloat. I was already gone, watching it all unfold from my porch with a cup of chamomile and a weather app open to track a snowstorm in Utah that their system now couldn't see coming. The company kept trying to reset the servers, ping the endpoints, reach the vendor, me with frantic, urgent requests. I didn't reply. My contract had ended. My obligation was over. And the code? It wasn't broken. It was bound by a clause they had signed in haste a decade ago and then ignored every year since. The brilliance of it wasn't in the wording, it was in the silence. Because I didn't need to sabotage them. All I had to do was let the paper do its job. Mason's voice was already cracking by the time Monday turned to Tuesday. The guy who waltzed through meetings with swagger and dumb metaphors about turning the ship was now pacing around conference rooms like a lab rat on Adderall, trying to reverse engineer a disaster he'd triggered with both hands. By 9 a.m., he had the senior staff in a panic huddle. One of them, a guy named Dennis from Client Accounts, messaged me later. He called you a rogue agent, said you built in tripwires to sabotage the company. I nearly choked on my coffee. Tripwires? The only thing I'd built was a license with rules he didn't bother to read. The system didn't detonate, it complied. That's what scared them more than anything, how calm the fallout was. He dragged legal into a room and demanded they correct the narrative. He wanted a memo drafted calling me malicious. Wanted an investigation, a press release even. Damage control with spin so heavy it probably knocked the earth off its axis. But legal didn't blink. You terminated the agreement unilaterally, they said, deadpan. The system did what it's licensed to do. That's when the pivot happened. Suddenly, I wasn't an aging compliance lead. I was a malicious actor, a shadow IT problem, a threat. The HR rep who handed me my severance with a fake smile last Friday, she was now fielding questions from legal about her process. The same underpaid legal associate who'd laughed at my envelope. He was now scheduling 3 back-to-back calls with insurance and outside counsel. And Mason? Mason called me 3 times. Voicemail after voicemail, each one more desperate than the last. The first sounded annoyed. Look, this isn't funny. Just call me back. We'll figure it out. The second tried charm. Okay, so maybe there was a misunderstanding. No big deal. Let's just talk, yeah? The third was quiet, short. Just 1 sentence. Let's talk. Name your price. I didn't answer, but I didn't have to, because the Chicago client did. They froze their Q4 order cycle, just like that. A multi-million-dollar logistics chain put on ice, citing inconsistent route validation and breach of SLA terms. No system meant no confirmation. No confirmation meant no cargo. Then the Western region followed. A major beverage distributor pulled their December allocation, midstream. That penalty alone cracked 6 figures, with late fees stacking daily. Word reached the board, and for the first time, Mason wasn't in the center of the room anymore. He was in the corner, trying not to look at anyone too long. The same people who'd once applauded his aggressive modernization were now asking quieter, colder questions. Who approved the migration? Who signed off on the contract termination? Who verified ownership of the software? No one said my name. They didn't have to, because at that point, I wasn't the problem anymore. I was the proof. Proof that arrogance without documentation is just firewood waiting on a match. Mason kept trying to claw his way back into control. He suggested a patch. He called the Austin team. He even tried to convince legal to just write a new agreement and move forward, like you can duct tape over a legal hole big enough to drive a freightliner through. But the truth had settled in. Every lie he told echoed louder the longer I stayed silent. And I planned on staying very, very silent. By Wednesday morning, my inbox had turned into a job fair. First came a private equity firm out of Boston, slick, efficient, their recruiter tossing around buzzwords like optimization vertical and agile realignment, like I hadn't just watched a multi-million-dollar meltdown triggered by that exact kind of word salad. They dangled a VP title and a bonus package big enough to renovate a house I didn't even want. But something about it felt thin, like dating someone because they suddenly noticed your glow up. Next was a competitor, one of the same firms that used to circle Virex's bid pool like sharks. Their message was a little bolder. We've been watching your work. We'd like to bring that expertise to our back-end architecture. A polite way of saying, oh, we always wanted Atlas route, and now that it's off the shelf, maybe we can cut a deal. Flattering, but opportunistic. Then came the third. Vector Hall Inc., no LinkedIn message, no recruiter spam, just a direct email from the COO, Annabelle Thorne. Subject line, not for a fight, for the future. The body was short, no attachments, just a meeting link and 1 sentence. We don't want revenge, we want results. So I joined the call. No fluff, no pitch deck, just her face, a spreadsheet open in the background, and the calm tone of someone who knew exactly what mattered and didn't need to sell it. Your system has architecture we respect, she said. You kept 7 terminals running without major outages for nearly a decade. That kind of continuity is rare. What we're offering isn't just a role, it's autonomy. Build it your way. Just tell us where the friction points are. No questions about Mason. No probing about Virex. Just a clean slate and a mutual understanding. Precision over politics. She sent over the terms that afternoon. $600K signing bonus. 5-year contract, non-exclusive. Full architecture ownership. No clawbacks, no shadow legal clauses, no asset seizures tucked into footnotes. And best of all, no culture fit interviews. No trust-building exercises, no slides about ping pong tables or mental health days that were really just unpaid overtime in disguise. Just work. The good kind. I didn't play hard to get. I didn't ask for more. I just signed. And after that, I went for a walk. Nothing dramatic. Just a quiet loop around the lake near my place. The leaves were starting to shift. Burnt orange, deep crimson. That air you only get right before the first frost, when the world feels like it's between states. I breathed it in and thought, this is what a clean exit feels like. People kept asking me if I planned to go after Mason, sue him, expose him, leak something, but I didn't need to. He was already sinking in the quicksand he'd stirred up himself. And me? I was already 3 steps ahead. No press release, no headline, just movement. Because sometimes the sharpest revenge is not vengeance, it's irrelevance. And Mason had just become exactly that. By day 6, the silence had turned to whispers, and the whispers to damage control. Virex's boardroom, the one with the curved glass table and the 2 expensive chairs no one ever truly relaxed in, was finally full. Every seat taken, every face tense, no catered breakfast, no friendly backslaps, no small talk. Just that low, oppressive air you get when the consequences finally walk in wearing suits. Richard Greer, the CEO, Mason's father, sat at the head. He looked like he hadn't slept. Not the kind of tired that comes from a long week, but the kind that seeps into your bones when you realize the crown you're wearing is made of glass. Legal started the breakdown. They didn't sugarcoat it, didn't hedge. Just facts. Like hammer strikes. System ownership never transferred. License lapsed immediately upon termination. No succession clause, no fallback contract, no technical or legal authority to replicate. And client penalties? As of that morning, $1.26 million in climbing, 2 frozen contracts, 3 paused renewals, 5 incoming claims for breach. No system, no routing, no confidence. It didn't take much to see the pattern. The system worked when it was licensed. It stopped when it wasn't. The end. The CFO tried to offer a slide deck, something with red graphs and potential mitigation plans, but Richard waved it off. He looked around the room, then asked the one question no one wanted to touch. Who told my son he could fire the architect without checking ownership? Silence. HR stared at their printed emails. One of them, I heard later, had scribbled standard offboarding in the margins like that would explain anything. Legal avoided eye contact. Even the usually loud-mouthed VP of Ops sat with his fingers templed like he was praying for a fire alarm. But Mason's chair? Empty. He hadn't shown up. No explanation. No delay. Just gone. Richard didn't say his name again. Didn't scream. Didn't assign blame. He just sat there, shoulders slightly slumped, as if the full weight of inherited arrogance had finally landed where it belonged. Then he stood. No ceremony. Just that slow push of the chair, the faint creak of old joints and older regrets. He said, "Reverse whatever you can." A pause. Then, "And next time, we verify before we celebrate." And with that, the meeting ended. No vote. No applause, just a handful of executives realizing that the golden boy with the marketing degree had detonated the company's spine, because no one bothered to ask a single legal question before handing him the matches. The next morning, Mason's name was removed from the company org chart, not with an announcement, just gone. No farewell email, no damage control memo. Just a blank space where his title used to be, like the system had quietly auto-corrected itself. And maybe, in a way, it had. 1 week later, the envelope arrived. Heavy paper, raised lettering. No return address on the front, but the seal was unmistakable. Virex Freight Lines. I didn't rush to open it. Let it sit on the entry table for a day, right next to a half-drunk mug of tea and a potted basil I kept forgetting to water. When I finally sliced it open, I wasn't surprised. They wanted the license back, not with apology, not with grace. Just corporate formalities in legalese. We are prepared to discuss terms for reinstating the core routing license previously maintained under agreement with Vexar Holdings LLC. There it was. No dancing, no begging, just a white flag sealed in envelope weight cardstock. I didn't respond. My attorney did. We tripled the fee, no maintenance clause, no on-call support, no strategic consulting, no tweaks, no hand-holding, just a cold lease. Non-exclusive, locked terms, pay or pause. That's it. The reply came 2 days later. They agreed. No counter, no haggling, just a signed acceptance and a wire confirmation tucked inside a boilerplate PDF so dry it might as well have been carved from dust. Mason's name wasn't on anything. No CC, no BCC, not even a per my son's request. Just a silent redaction, like he'd never existed in the first place. I didn't ask what happened to him, didn't need to. His absence said more than any email ever could. That kind of shame doesn't exit through the front door. It slinks out the side, hoping no one's looking. And as for Richard, no call, no apology, just a notification the next morning that he'd added me on LinkedIn. No message, no emoji, just the connection request, sitting there like a final page with nothing left to write. I accepted. Then I closed my laptop, poured another cup of tea, and opened the onboarding deck from Vector Hall. Their dev team had sent over an outline for integrating Atlas Route 2.0 into a new dual route certification module. I read through it slowly. No noise, no panic, just clean work. Somewhere in the background, the world was still arguing about who caused what and how it all spiraled, but not me. I was already building the next system. This one wouldn't need a clause to survive. It would thrive on silence.